Good. Well, welcome everybody to this panel discussion. My name is Ibrahim Babatunde Anoba, and I am with the Atlas Network, the Center for African Prosperity at Atlas Network. And I also work as editor of AfricanLiberty.org, which is a project founded by Atlas and Cato many, many years ago. And right now we train a lot of young advocates in Africa on writing about freedom and critical issues affecting the continent's prosperity, which of course relates to today's discussion. And I am so glad to see many of us back in person, and more so my colleagues and friends and mentors on this panel. This is Dr. Denis Foretia. He is the executive director of Nkafu Policy Institute in Cameroon, one of the most impactful think tanks on the African continent. It's so great to have you, Doc. My very good friend, Alexander Hammond. He is the founder of a very exciting group called the Initiative for African Trade and Prosperity, which is based out of the Vincent Institute in the University of Buckingham.
University of Buckingham, that's right.
Brilliant. And my other colleague from Burundi, Bruce Vaillant Ntangibingura from the Center for Development and Enterprise in the Great Lakes. And it's so great to have you, gentlemen. And of course, our very, very good friend from Kenya, who so unfortunately couldn't join us at the very, very last minute, the amazing Linda Kavuka. Linda, I hope you can hear us.
Hello, everyone. I can hear you.
Brilliant. That's so great. I mean, we would have loved to have you in person, but COVID does what COVID does. But regardless, it's so great to have everyone here again. And I think we should be a little bit familiar with the topic, or maybe half of the topic, which is about the poverty in Africa and how the recently ratified or recently implemented Continental Free Trade Area agreements can propel the continent towards a century of prosperity, or more so, as we put it, serve as a poverty cure on the continent. But this is it may appear as something very simple. I mean, you have trade, you have poverty. Trade can also solve poverty, but it's more critical or even expanded than that, particularly if you're talking about Africa, which is the reason why we've assembled this very fascinating crop of think tank leaders across the continent to help us make sense of what the AFCFTA means itself and how it can actually be a poverty cure. So just to start off, the poverty rate in Africa, which a lot of us are familiar with, but just to reiterate, extreme poverty on the continent is about 490 million people in terms of definition, 490 million people. That's pretty much the population of the US combined with Canada, combined with Germany. So imagine those three countries, everyone in those countries living in extreme poverty, absolute penury. Can you imagine that? That's a lot, right? But you also have this Continental Free Trade Area, which I'm going to allow my panel to talk about. But just to give a glimpse, people are saying it's going to create about 33% greater integration when it comes to trade relations in Africa, and probably cut the deficit of trade on the continent to about 51%. Those are great numbers, but how do they relate? How do they come together? So to start off, Alex, I want you to kind of help us further define what the AFCFTA means. I mean, okay, we know it's a free trade agreement, but what are the benefits that can potentially come out of this? What does it mean in the most basic terms?
Sure. Thanks for my mic on. All good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the free trade area, it is part of the African Union Agenda 2063. And this agenda is their idea to really promote economic development and growth and acceleration across Africa by the year 2063. There's a few elements of that. There's they want to implement in a couple of decades, most likely an African Union passport. Progress has been a bit slow on that. They want to do a single air market, so the airlines basically go across borders more easily. And then finally, there's the African Continental Free Trade Area. First open for signatures in March 2018, when Paul Kagame, president of Rwanda, was in charge of the chairman of the AU. So far, out of the 55 countries, 54 have signed it to show their support. Really, really good start. The only one that hasn't is Eritrea, often called Africa's hermit kingdom, unfortunately. And as well as that, about 38 countries, will probably be about 40 within a couple of months, but about 38 have ratified it, which means it's gone through their governments, they've given their the papers and all the necessary legal instruments to the African Union. Some of the quick tariff reductions will be within 5 to 10 years. About 90% of tariffs aim to be removed on goods traded between member states. Really good start. And within about 13 years, they aim for 97% of tariffs to be removed. So that's a broad brush. We can always dig into the benefits and what that means in the estimates.
Sure. I mean, I think what I'm getting as the core here is that it's going to reduce tariffs. Mm-hmm. The key barriers to free trade. I mean, those are like the key things when you want to talk about, people exchanging goods across borders. But Bruce, your organization, the Center for Development and Enterprise, ran a very fascinating story about a lady that was trying to import eggs or export eggs from Burundi to, is it Uganda or one of the other Eastern African countries, and how she had to deal with tariffs on both sides. And eventually, the price of or the market value of the egg itself wasn't worth anything after that. She didn't even add any money to gain from it. And that's a very, very kind of archetype of what actually goes on with regular people dealing with these kind of barriers in Africa. You want to tell us how your organization has been able to help the Great Lakes region through its free trade policy pursuit?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. So, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we believe that it can change many things in terms of ease of doing trade in Africa, and especially for us, for CD Great Lakes, we have been working for the cross-border trade among the neighboring countries with Burundi. Burundi is a landlocked country, and it aims to have goods from the neighboring countries, among which there are DRC, Tanzania, Rwanda, and other countries. And these trade have been basically very hard, especially for women who have the opportunity to trade and to have money for a living of their families. But with the tariffs, with all the barriers, like the example you was giving for women who try to sell eggs from Burundi to DRC, or cloves from DRC to Burundi, which have to face many barriers, especially non-tariff barriers. Some of them are sexually harassed and so on. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area should help to reduce all these barriers. But also this can be touched later, but I'm a little bit pessimistic about the challenges which could raise after, because the African Continental Free Trade Area comes after some regional structures which are already there. We have 160, but only 6 are now working perfectly. So DRC, Burundi are in the same region, but the barriers are still there. So for me to believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area will change everything, it's a little bit hard, but it's a hope. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think as an African, I cannot but be hopeful about the prospect of the free trade area itself. But the reality is that this is not the first time we've had policy designs in the same fashion. There have been approaches or attempts to reduce barriers to trade on the continent before the AFCA itself. And one of the most pertinent pessimistic argument I've heard is that this is not going to make too much of a difference. I mean, you've heard Alex talk about the whole benefit of it, but Doctor, do you think this is actually going to make any difference compared to other past approaches to cutting the barriers to trade on the continent? Do you think that there is an appetite to do it?
Well, I would say I am very hopeful, not necessarily super hopeful. There is a lot of pessimism when you come from from the continent, and a lot of the barriers and a lot of the red tape that's there. But I think some perspective is due in the sense that once the agreement was reached, the time it took for national governments to actually sign on to it was at record pace. That record pace is something that we in Africa had not seen. It took less than 2 years for more than 22 countries to actually sign this on, and less than 3 years for you to have more than 22 countries actually ratify and deposit this at the AU for it to be implemented. So that is record pace. Now, this comes from the backdrop of the 91 Abuja Treaty, which set in motion a lot of the things that ended up taking place up to 2018. Now, some context is also due in the sense that part of what these governments try to do in the free trade agreement is, African countries are broken up into the two main blocks, the blocks that are the least developed countries and the medium income countries. And through negotiations, each of these blocks are given different time frames to be able to reduce their tariffs. So the least developed countries have been given 10 years, to be able to liberalize close to 90% of their tariffs to be reduced. The middle income have been given, 5 years to be able to do that. But overall, the hope is that by the year number 13, 97% of all the tariffs would have been reduced. So there is that, time frame for it. The other benefit that we see currently is the fact that even though there is cause to be pessimistic, there is a lot of moves, especially in the COVID era, realization that a lot of inter-African trade needs to take place. Currently, you have inter-African trade is only at 16%. We know the EU is at 56% or so, and it's always the hope to get to the EU level. There is a lot of growth that will be generated in each of these countries. Obviously, there will be some, not necessarily winners. Everybody is going to benefit, but there are transitional pains that we all will have to deal with. But there is great potential for that. The last thing I would say right now is that of all the modeling that has been done regarding the benefits for it, definitely reducing tariffs is a major component for it. But from all the modeling that were done, whether it's the World Bank, the African Development Bank, UNECA was done, the greatest benefit comes from reducing the non-tariff barriers. Those unilateral policy decisions that are made in individual countries that really restrict and limit the potential of individual businesses to be able to export. So, and it's part of an area where we and Nkafu are extremely focused on in how we help inform Cameroon and the greater implementation of the AFTA in reducing non-trade barriers, non-tariff barriers.
Fascinating. I mean, you mentioned the fact that these African countries are pretty much approaching the same destination, but they're coming into that journey with different cars, different kind of transportation means. Some of them are very weaker countries economic-wise, and some of them are stronger economy-wise. And you're asking all of them to be liberalizing their economies or implementing certain policies at the same time. That has been causing a lot of pessimism that people are not on the same level. And Linda, your country, Kenya, is one of the most powerful economies on the continent. But I remember in the late 1950s when your former president, who, what was his name? Baba? Kenyatta? Yeah, Kenyatta and the likes of Nkrumah and some of the major leaders then were trying to push for this kind of agreement that Africa has now become independent. But we also need to unite economy-wise. And I remember one of the key arguments then was that you have Ghana, you have Kenya countries like Egypt, which are bigger economies, but you also have smaller countries that do not have the same capacity, but you're asking them to implement the same policies at the same level. But the thing is that they do not have the same capacity. So that argument has come again with the AFCFTA. Do you think countries like Burundi or countries like Lesotho can benefit from the AFCFTA the same way Kenya, Nigeria, or Cameroon will benefit from it?
You've raised an important concern, and this has actually come up during the conversations convincing African states to ratify the AFTA. And for many months, Nigeria stayed back in ratifying. And this is, I think, one of those challenges that came up. Of, our traders are going to be competing with others from the rest of the continent. How do we protect? So I'll give you the Eastern African community. Have a look at this. So this is one of the celebrated regional economic communities we have in Africa, probably one of the most well planned out, and it has been successful in some of its protocols that have been pushed. Like recently, there was a move to allow Africans to travel within the Eastern African community with their ID, as opposed to having a passport. Now, to someone, this may not be such a big idea, but getting a passport, you have to pay up to $40 and above, but a national identity card is free, which means every member of the South African community from the different countries definitely has an identity card, but majority of our people don't afford to register for a passport. So this plan has made the movement in the community easier especially for our efforts. Now, Eastern African community has Kenya, of course, Tanzania, we have Uganda as well. Rwanda and Burundi are members. South Sudan is set to join recently. And also, very, very recently, there's conversations of the Democratic Republic of Congo joining the Eastern African community. So imagine the number of countries that are members of this regional economic community and the opportunities that they're each coming with and their strength. Congo is the richest country in the continent with minerals and land and food and whatnot. Kenya has a very large economy because of the GDP and the value of the Kenyan shilling. But then you have Uganda as well, and you have Burundi, and they're competing for this. And on the face of it, you would see that because Kenya is well positioned, because of the, first of all, because of our history, because of all the attention we get and all the international organizations in the country, the education system and the economy, it is better placed to be the first runner of benefiting in AFTA or even any regional plan in the community. And Burundi would be seriously disadvantaged and they wouldn't be able to compete with Kenya. But we're all failing to see that while you're opening up African countries, the little countries, to the bigger economies, you're also giving these smaller countries a larger market, larger than they would ever have. A trader, you mentioned a trader from Burundi who wants to sell eggs. So with the AFTA, she can be able to move her eggs from Bujumbura up to Nairobi if she so wishes. And why Nairobi? There's a bigger market. There's more money to be earned. The Kenyan shilling has higher value. If she succeeds in selling her eggs in Kenya, it means she takes back more value to Burundi, a higher amount than she would have if she just limited herself to selling in maybe DRC or Rwanda. While there is a challenge of you competing against higher, better positioned countries, there is also a greater opportunity of opening up markets to our SMEs, especially who otherwise would have been limited to only their national markets. But now they have at least a chance at an international market and a chance to play a fair game in trade. And we know right now, by using technology or even just your own wit, it's the smartest person and the person who is quicker that will be able to catch, the day's harvest. So I wouldn't tell our people to be very scared of opening up the market. But this is our very first chance to allow free market to play its game, to allow people who otherwise would have been unsuccessful get a chance to succeed.
Let me just add something to what Linda said there, because she made a very great point that when the first time I went to Canada, and I don't know, probably have some Canadians in the room here, but the first time I went to Canada, I asked myself, I thought Canada was part of the Commonwealth. I thought it was, the Queen was in charge of the Commonwealth. Yes, they are, but they are driving on the right side of the road, right? They're not driving on the UK side of the road. They're driving on the right side of the road. And my question is, why is it that, they're driving on the right side of the road? And, to me, and I don't know that this is the reason why they decided, but to me, they are dealing with the United States of America that is next door. And, the folks coming from the United States drive up. They are not going to learn how to, drive on the other side. So the Canadian government, to me, aligns its economy with the bigger boy, the larger player. And it's the same thing that we are looking in Cameroon. Cameroon is, a smaller country relative to neighboring Nigeria, which has, is the largest economy in Africa. The population in Nigeria is 190 million. The population in Cameroon is 23 million or so. We are telling our government to align with Nigeria because, once you align with Nigeria, you would grow. As Nigeria grows, you will grow. So the thing to the smaller economies is you have a bigger market. You've enlarged the pool for where your people can sell. And by enlarging the pool, everybody's going to benefit from that.
I mean, I totally agree with that. And on your point, Linda, it makes me think about this whole AFCFTA thing as a major throwback for Africa, isn't it? Because you go back to the pre-colonial times. I mean, I do a PhD in African history, and I know that one of the key things that made Africans come together before colonialism was trade. I mean, you had people that would work with camels or horses if they can afford it, or even on their foot for months to get commodities or to sell their own. So now opening the whole continent for this integrated market is so fascinating. But I just want to say, as we proceed, I also want our audience to engage in the conversation as well. So we're not going to wait until 10 minutes to ask you for questions. So if you have questions, please do indicate, and some of our people will get a microphone to you, and we'll be happy to take your questions or even comments. But back to the question of this being a throwback for Africa, and I want you to talk about this bruise. But one of the things, again, that people talk about is that Africa is a very diverse continent. People have different market cultures. They have different approaches to commodity definition. Their monetary sense are also different. But with the AFCFTA, you are coming in with a unilateral document that everybody must abide by this. Isn't that in itself, again, throwing us back to colonialism, that everybody must abide by one book?
Thank you so much. So, talking about colonialism with our organizations, again, CDE Great Lakes, we have, with the Fungwanjia project, we have been able to remove a list of 100 sensitive products in our country.
Wow.
To only 6 products, sensitive products. Wow. So, thank you. So when you come to look at these 6 remaining products, there are all products which we have from our colonial system. This is sugar, this is cloves, this is beers, and all these corporates, we have it from our colonial system, and they are powerful enough to still be closing our market to other competition. And this is quite very challenging for an organization like CDE Great Lakes. And we really believe that if we don't open for these small corporates to have the chance to innovate, to bring new things which maybe we don't think about today, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area won't benefit to the large large population which are struggling to get out of poverty in our countries.
Yeah, can I just add? I think one of the other benefits of a free trade area is not only what we're saying now about kind of restoring the ancient trade routes that once zigzagged across Africa, but it's also removing a lot of the arbitrariness of the borders within Africa. And it is cliche to say the borders are such a problem, but it's so true, because you hear it all the time, but it is so true. The borders at the 1884 Berlin Conference drawn up by Europeans and pay very little attention to geographical factors, cultural factors, where people traded with each other, where people roamed, etc. So if this free trade area helps to remove the barriers at the border and through the African Union Agenda 2063 to kind of have, if not an African Union passport, it makes it far easier to travel across borders. I mean, even today, if you live in the Republic of Congo, you have to get a visa to visit the DRC, which is just next door. Whereas if you're a citizen of Micronesia or Singapore, you don't need a visa to visit the DRC. So what I'm saying is the free trade area can really serve as a way to remove the barriers at the border, which I'm not saying will undo the damaging legacy of colonialism, but will help undo the remaining legacy to some extent it remains today.
Doc, so you heard him talk about the border issue, and we will be so myopic if we not reckoning with the fact that the borders are one of the key things preventing some of the insecurity problems in one country transmitting to another country. That's what people will say, that it's protecting that. But we know that even before these borders were drawn up by Europeans at the Berlin Conference, as he said, Africans had ways of preventing insecurity problem in one place from coming into the other place, even without physical barriers. Do you think in the reality of terrorism and insecurity space across the continent, do you think it's in the best interest of Africa to approach this AFCFTA in such a way that borders become less physical, things become much more integrated, people become much more integrated? Do you think we will be doing ourselves a benefit?
Yeah, I think that I do think we will be doing ourselves a benefit. I think that part of when we look at the continent as a whole, we have the positives, we have the not so positives, and we have the I don't want to say really bad, but yes, you do have the really bad issues, and all of those form a melange, and we try to make sense of everything going on. But there are still foundational issues that hold us back, or that make the promise of the Africa Continental Free Trade less promising, and things that as African governments, as civil society actors within the continent, there is great push towards. So there are fundamental issues. First, there is a governance challenge. A governance challenge that there is colonial influence of that governance challenge, and the fact that we continue to fight to create free societies, but a lot of areas in sub-Saharan Africa, from the region that I'm in, the Central Africa sub-region is the most restrictive, sub-region in Africa, and the one with the highest number of dictatorships. So that fundamental governance challenge, which makes it very difficult for new ideas to spread, is a fundamental problem, and that leads to a break in social contract between the governed and those governing us, and that spreads again a lot of the insecurity because conflict happens. I'll give a quick example. Cameroon-Nigerian border. I'm talking about Cameroon, but I could talk about Ethiopia, I could talk about Sudan and South Sudan, I could talk about Mali, I could talk about Guinea, but Cameroon-Nigeria. Now, the Nigerian government, until recently, I don't know if it's still in place, until recently took unilateral decision to close borders for it. Now, between the border with Cameroon, that border wasn't closed. You know why? There's conflict on that border. So that border wasn't closed. The border between the Anglophone Cameroon, where there is a conflict in Cameroon, and there has to be security cooperation between the government of Nigeria and Cameroon. The northern part of the border, which is the Boko Haram insecurity area, that border wasn't closed, but Nigeria did close the borders for the others.
Isn't that odd?
It is odd. But the fundamental issue that has to be there is that while we see the benefits of the Africa Continental Free Trade, we must not look at this in isolation. We have to look at it in how we ensure that the fundamentals of a free society, trade being one of it, but the fundamentals of the free society, the rule of law, the freedom of speech, all these bases, journalists, all those things have to be in place for you to have the multiplicative effects of something like AFTA. So, but I think that there is great promise irrespective of this.
Chime in, Alex.
Yeah, can I just say, brilliant point. And in there was actually the point about Nigeria closing its borders. And the recent wave of doing so, they did so in August 2019. And this actually draws us to one of the worries, or not challenges, of free trade area and one of the problems we have to overcome. And that's Nigeria ratified the free trade area, yet its borders with a lot of its neighbors, I think, are now only partially open to trade. They were closed for many years, and it wasn't because of COVID. It was long before COVID was a thing. So this is the worry. You have Africa's biggest economy, ratified the free trade area. They're not showing any actions of supporting free trade apart from ratification. And the worry is they ratified the free trade area to get their feet at the negotiation table and could influence procedures and potentially water them down. But this is an issue where some states have ratified even though they show no other desire to promote free trade.
Things can be
I'd
really
like to
fascinating. Yeah, I'm actually coming to you, Linda. I just want to say things can be really fascinating and at the same time challenging in Africa when you're talking about the same issue. And Linda, so there is, as you hear, there is this feeling that we will be doing ourselves a great disservice if we are only focusing on the economic aspects of solving poverty. In this case, the AFCFTA is an economic creation. But people saying that in the past, we've also had structural adjustment programs, some other economic reforms, which didn't translate to poverty alleviation. And we're pretty much repeating the same mistake. So, Linda, do you think that solving poverty in Africa will require some political, some social, non-economic reforms to accompany whatever economic reform, in this case, AFCFTA? Do you think that is actually a valid argument?
Indeed, it's a very valid argument because some of these challenges that we're facing, probably some of the trade barriers that we have are politically instigated. My colleagues have been speaking about the border closures in Nigeria, and Hammond mentioned this happened way before COVID-19, and we all know this was a government directive. In the move to promote more, they were saying that they want to encourage the growth of the rice commodity in Nigeria and the chicken farming. So closing the borders will help this trade grow in the country. And if you come to the Eastern African region, this happens a lot, where, for instance, in Kenya, sugar is one of the most protected commodities is sugar in Kenya. The companies that we have usually have government backing, and they have failed drastically due to corruption cases. Because of this, the commodity is scarce in the country, and sometimes we find sugar being imported from Uganda. It's way cheaper than what is available in Kenya. But because the government wants to promote the sugar industry and protect the sugar industry of the country, it bans or it limits the importing of sugar made from Uganda. And this becomes a government directive where an agreement goes where they say, we are marking our sugar industry as one of that we need to protect under the Eastern African community. Therefore, the sugar is stopped from coming into the country. So if you look at some of a good number of the barriers we have, non-tariff barriers and even the tariff barriers we have, they exist because of politics. Currently, Bruce may shed more light on this. The Burundi-Rwanda border has been closed. Okay, maybe this happened because of COVID-19, but consider these two countries are landlocked. So most of the food and products in the country are being imported from outside. And they do import from as far as Kenya. It passes through Uganda to Rwanda to Burundi, or from Uganda or from Rwanda to Burundi. But because of that border closure, considering it is landlocked anyway, you're further pushing these people into more poverty, especially the SMEs and the MSMEs, because they depend on that border to trade for movement of people and for movement of goods. So a simple government directive of opening the border will improve this situation. Right now, I think I am one of the heavy believers that we can end poverty in Africa through trade. I really believe in free markets and trade. And some of the challenges that we face and the reasons why we in Africa are not able to move around in the continent very well is because of government directives. Our visa restrictions are crazy. If you look at the regulations, getting a Kenyan visa from Cameroon used to be very difficult. Why? What is for those of us who've grown up in the 80s, 90s, we've not seen any issue between Cameroon and the Kenyan government. So we do not understand why does there exist a very difficult visa policy between these two countries. Getting a Nigerian visa is actually very difficult and complicated. Why is this? On the other side, Ghana has made their visa very easy to get. Every African can get a Ghanaian visa on arrival. If you want to come to Kenya now, for most people, you just apply online and you get the visa on arrival. Because Africans can't get visa to travel within other countries, we don't even consider moving to another African country for the sake of improving your economic status or for trading or for services, because it's just far removed. You would rather choose to go to as far as Canada or even Australia than consider moving to an African country. At the moment right now, there is a serious issue between the people of Nigeria and South Africa because of how difficult it is to move there. A lot of Africans move to South Africa for economic benefits, to go and work. Most of them actually work in the private sectors and they generate income from the country, but they face serious xenophobia. They face serious xenophobia. Yeah, so you see, we can actually resolve a number of challenges, a number of issues that we face in the continent by political reason, like by passing regulation or reducing the regulations that we have that further just break us apart. And if we all say that we are for Africa and for AfTA, as everyone is now singing, we need to see that practically, beginning with our legislators, beginning with our civil society, and beginning with changing our laws and making Africa more African-friendly.
Fascinating. I mean, I totally agree with you, particularly if you're coming from the historical perspective of this issue. In the 80s and 17th century, when we were actually economically integrated with Europe based on the many economic. Let me just be explicit. Africa was integrated with Europe because of slavery and some other factors. I mean, we were actually getting a lot of economic benefit then. But the reason why those didn't really translate to development across the continent before colonialism came was because there were infighting among African city-states. So where there is political instability, you cannot have economic prosperity. But I'm going to come back to that political question. Do we have questions from the audience? Yeah. The young lady, then we come to the amazing Linda Weston.
So I don't know much about it, but I often hear concerns about the inroads of China in Africa. I mostly want to know what you all think of China's economic actions in Africa, whether you think that that is removing the autonomy in some sense of African people, but also how does that development intersect with the AU's efforts at free trade?
Interesting. Okay, can we take one more question and we address both as we move on? Linda Weston.
I wonder if you could tell something of the strategies you think will need to be followed to ensure the success of this agreement. There seem to be an awful lot of challenges and a lot of misunderstanding, and it's difficult to know who you're going to aim the strategies at and what sort of strategies can be successful? And is there any way you think others can help, or this is a purely African thing, or your views?
Interesting. So we're going to take those two questions real quick before we go to the audience again. Any one of you want to talk about China? Because I have very well-known critical thought about that.
Well, I wanted to choose my question if I had a choice. I wanted to go to Linda's question,
Sure.
And leave somebody else to deal with, China.
You don't want to deal with China.
Nobody wants to do. Anyway, I'll do China and pass Linda's question to somebody else. Well, I think the Chinese have a clear strategy for Africa and the world, and they're implementing their strategy in Africa. And the African countries also have a choice most of the time, a choice of either continuing to trade with Europe. They have most African countries have economic partnership agreements with Europe that have been signed, and also setting trade agreements with the U.S., AGOA, and some other trade agreements. And with Brexit now, the UK is aggressively negotiating trade agreements. We have one with the UK currently. So the bottom line with China is that most folks are going to, most African countries assess what the offer is, and especially if the offer does not have strings attached, they take.
Are you sure they don't have string offers?
Well, you have a choice to make, but they don't ask you to change your human rights. They don't ask you to do any of these things, and so dictators accept.
What about the seizure of national assets?
Who is that?
The seizure of national assets.
Well, they seize national assets when you make poor decisions and you can't pay them back because you signed their trade agreement in the first place. It's on you. It's not on them. Now, my issue is that if the African governments want to be sincere and fair with themselves and not focus on staying in power and actually doing what they need to do to increase the economic life of the people, they would make better deals. And they would most of the time the deals that they take is not because they do not have other ways of getting the money that they need. But they are taking it for, as Linda said, political reasons that ensures that they perpetuate themselves in power. But it's hard for you to blame somebody who is bringing you the money, but they are not putting a gun on your head to take the money, and you are taking it because it's the easier route. And China is playing the long game, and you are playing the game with them.
I agree. I believe it's neocolonialism. But your response, can you tag that with the strategy question from the lady?
Well, I think the strategy one's for the Africans.
So now you want to go to China?
I'll do China just quickly. No, so I think firstly, people often overestimate the actual investment of China in Africa. It's a lot, but it's the US and France combined, or the US and the UK combined. That's about what it equals. So it's not exponentially more, but it's still a fair bit. And of course, the worry is China will build big infrastructure projects, airports, ports. Countries then won't be able to pay back, and then in a couple of decades, when these countries are middle-income countries, China then owns the airports or ports. And is it in Uganda they've just taken over the
Uganda,
airport?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the first times in Africa they've actually taken over a big infrastructure project. It was just a few weeks ago. They've now are in charge of Uganda's airport, and I assume it's for 99 years.
You heard about the response of China as well. They say, people were like, why would you take the national airport? And China actually said, well, it was in the agreement. Well, we do not know what the agreement is about. But, the complaint used to be that we don't know the agreement. We don't know what you're giving up as collateral for those loans. And China said, well, an agreement exists, and in that agreement is that the fact that we will take the collateral, and now we've taken the collateral.
And finally, there's also a kind of a problem of China building national parliaments and governmental buildings in Africa. So they built the new African Union headquarters in 2017. And then I think it was a few months or a year or so later, the workers at the building noticed every morning at 2 a.m. or so, their servers started sending files to Shanghai. They were a bit confused by this. They did a huge debug and just found the place was riddled with microphones, bugs, and whatever else technology. So they instantly ripped out the servers, as you would, and they were looking for new looking for new people to come in and install the servers. And of course, China offered to do so. Luckily, they declined. But the reason why I mention that is it shows they're great at building brand new, shiny buildings, but there are bugs, quite literally, in them. And China has built, I think, about 15 to 20 governmental national parliament buildings across Africa.
Perhaps more than that.
Not just the governments that represent them, themselves representing themselves. I hope you're following on that. That's my take on that.
Yeah, and Linda, I want you and Bruce to talk on the strategy question, but also maybe if you have a comment quickly about the fact that it could be beneficial to do this on the people level, not necessarily the government level. Because now, going back to history, a lot of the trade before 1884 between Africa and elsewhere were initiated by people, regular people traveling across the trade routes, but now government has to be the one to anchor it. So Linda, you or Bruce, either one of you want to talk about the strategy question? What are the key strategies you think will help the FCFTA in like a minute? Yeah. Linda.
I'd love to speak about the strategy. And as you said, the first thing is, I think, there is a lot of citizen education that we need to do, sensitization of our people about what the after is. You'll be surprised that the conversation about the after is limited to boardrooms and hotels at the moment. The people for whom this agreement and the connection of Africa is supposed to benefit have no idea that we have such an amazing agreement and an amazing move that is happening that will change our lives. So we need to educate our people. Because of misconception and misunderstanding of what this is, those who've heard about it are against the free trade area because they look at it as, no, you're opening up my market to more competition. I'm already struggling to make an income, so no, please lock it, block, don't let people come into our country. But if we educate them to tell them how, while another person can come into your country the same way you can travel and have more access to bigger markets, they will probably have a better attitude towards it. Second, I want to speak about the trade facilitation. There is need for the African Union to embrace a lot of trade facilitation. And I don't know if our audience and all of us know about the Trade Facilitation Agreement by the WTO. It's one of their recent agreements that seeks to standardize the policies of trade through different methods. First being embracing technology. If you've traveled between borders of an African country, you would know how much of a hassle it is for you to get clearance, for you to get passport stamps, to pass through the border and all that. And if you're traveling just for tourism or for your own purposes, you already have to go through and ask a lot of questions, and there's a process. For trading, importing and exporting goods, it's even worse. We've seen goods getting spoiled on borders. Just recently, when at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the border between Kenya and Tanzania in Namanga, we have thousands of traders who pass through here on a daily basis. And Kenya being an arid and semi-arid country, we import a lot of our food from outside the region. But these traders were locked in the border, their goods rotting there over weeks. You can imagine cash food like tomatoes and onions, like they have a very short shelf life. And they were rotting because of, there was a lot of challenges happening and confusion because of COVID-19, but also our archaic methods of clearing goods played a role in this. So standardization using technology means making it easy for you, a trader, getting the clearance documents that you need, for you being able to apply for all the clearance documents, if you need to, from the different ministries of the government, from the health sectors and all those clearances that you need, if you can apply for them in advance online and get them, or if you can apply maybe through one portal and this connects you to all the ministries that you need and get them, it shortens the time that you need to visit these buildings and get your documents, and it also like makes it quicker for you. So embracing technology, we're talking about blockchain, embracing blockchain systems of, for you being able to share, if you have a certification from the point of origin and sharing it with the required ministry and them approving it. If you understand the blockchain technology, you'll be able to share documents that can't be corrupted easily, and it will make the trading within our borders easier and faster. Of course, people are facing corruption because you have to bribe the officials for you to get the clearances that you need and to pass through faster. So if we fight corruption, then trade will happen faster and better. So trade facilitation is something that we have ignored, the continent, but because of our systemic challenges, poor infrastructure, corruption, lack of even roads and all that, if we are to work on these at the moment, we'll go a long way in opening up our countries and placing each other in a better place to embrace after.
Right, I totally agree with that. Bruce, I'm going to have you answer the next question, but we are about 9 minutes out. I want us to have like a new set of questions to add to your response and strategy. A lot of questions, so okay, we take them, all of them at once.
Hello, I'm Mark Lutter, the founder and executive director of the Charter Cities Institute. You've been talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, but additionally, Africa has extremely rapid urbanization. Lagos, by some projections, is expected to reach about 100 million people by 2100. Within 30 years, I think it's like, 8 of the top 10 megacities are going to be in Africa, right? Kinshasa has more people, French speakers right now than Paris does. So how do you think about, urbanization, economic freedom, and is there a role for charter cities to play in that? Thanks.
Urbanization and the AFCFTA. Next question.
Thank you very much for this wonderful dissertation. My question is about restricted goods and how do you face the fight against the internal bureaucracy of the countries regarding the approval of restricted goods like food or medicines, which is the other side of this trade facilitation, this free trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So my question is about the different economic and political blocs we currently have in Africa. So there are quite a number of them that facilitate, however flawed they facilitate movement of people and goods. So my question is, how can we leverage on these blocs that we already have in Africa? Are they going to be helpful to us, and what influence can they have when we're talking about the African Free Trade Agreement?
Brilliant question. Any one more? We can take one more and down.
Okay, thank you. Now, my question is very simple. I'm coming from a country where we're surrounded by 8 neighbors, right? And there's so much, fighting between the neighbors in terms of trade. You find that people from, for example, Tanzania are fighting Zambians who are trading in their country. They've come here, they're taking business from us and stuff like that. And this is very difficult. Now, before we implement the free trade area, what strategy should we use to ensure that our people are aware that this will benefit everybody? Because before we do this, or before we actually sensitize, before our people understand the benefits this will bring, it will not be a success. People will continue fighting. So I want to find out from the panelists.
I agree with you. So this is how we're going to do it. We have 6 minutes. We'll take 30 seconds for each response. Anyone want to take the response on urbanization and AFCFTA? Urbanization and AFCFTA. Bruce, go ahead.
For me, maybe I will take the questions from fellow Africans, because others, they was very quick with the English. I was not able to follow. So how can we leverage on the blogs that are already existing? I think that this is very important to make sure that we benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We must first benefit from the existing blocks. And we know that in these blocks, we have challenges which are not solved yet. And to have the advantage on this all Africa, we have to take first the advantage of the blocks that's already existing. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks for making it very swift. Next question. Which question?
I can do charter cities one.
Charter cities, go ahead.
Yeah. Africa is rapidly urbanizing and rapidly the population is increasing. Every 2 years, the population equivalent to France is being added to the continent. In 30 years, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African, up from 1 in 10 in 1980. So it's getting big fast. Charter cities would definitely play a role. If I'm thinking practically, the countries that would probably be most receptive to it are, obviously would be the ones who are most economically free, tend to be the smaller ones. We're talking the Botswana, Mauritius, but it's kind of a bit separate from the continent itself, and Rwanda, but these aren't where the huge amounts of urbanization is happening. I mean, it would be fantastic if a charter city could happen in Nigeria or Kenya, but their level of economic freedom and how receptive they would be, they wouldn't be as receptive as a freer, smaller country. So it's a balancing act on that one.
Interesting, Doc.
All right.
I can add on to the charter cities.
I'll do 1 minute and go.
Okay, go ahead. So you want to talk about charter cities, Linda?
Yeah, I would add up to the charter cities.
Okay, just add to it in 20 seconds, please, Linda.
Okay. And I wanted to tell Hammond, there's actually efforts for creating charter cities in Kenya and Nigeria. In Nigeria, there is the Eco-Atlantic in Lagos. In Nairobi, there is the Konza City and the Tatu cities that are charter city projects that are coming up. However, they have really stalled all of them because of contractual issues and all those, so many moving parts are happening. People have not been able to agree. And also there's been challenges between the governments of these two countries and the charter cities themselves, because for you to create a charter city, there has to be an arrangement between the government to donate the maybe eminent domain rights of the land to the charter city and have an agreement of how that will work. The charter cities will play a big role in AFTA because they'll give the private sector a chance at tapping into the free trade area. And the first thing that comes to my mind is manufacturing. We know that Africa is performing poorly in manufacturing. And because of this, we are lagging behind and we are missing out on the fourth industrial revolution. So through the charter cities, we'll be able to have special economic zones and an opportunity for us to invest in manufacturing, especially the private sector companies to come up with commodities that would strive and bring the countries further ahead in economic empowerment. Yeah.
Right. So, Doug, lastly, your response, but I want you to also tie whatever response you're going to give to COVID-19 because you're the doctor in the house.
Yeah. Well, I don't have my mask, but well, so I think a couple of things. The question at the back regarding AFTA and how it will benefit convincing folks, and I think that's where Linda's question, Linda Whetstone's question really plays into it, in us as think tankers doing the job, the work that needs to be done to convince folks of the benefits of AFTA and how to go about implementing it, because it's not sufficient to talk about the benefits. A lot of governments are clueless as to how to go about implementation, so it's our job to really put the ideas out regarding how it's implemented. Regarding the economic zones, yes, the SADC region is the most connected region with South Africa at 36% and leading for trade. It's the zone that has the least tariffs at about 1.6% or so of the 8 economic zones. Us in Central Africa, we are still very restricted. Our tariffs are still up at 8% or something. So AFTA takes this into consideration, that your question regarding that. AFTA supersedes the economic zones, if there is any conflict on that. And I just want to make one other point, that the implementation of AFTA, is done in stages. The negotiations for the final document, they've done the first phase, which was the negotiation on goods and services that has been done. The current negotiation is phase 2 negotiations regarding intellectual property rights, competition policy. And the deadline is 31st of December in like how many days? That's the deadline for phase 2 negotiations. And then phase 3 negotiations will start afterwards. And lastly, the AFTA calls for only 3% of goods can be designated by any country as restricted goods. So regarding your question there. Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you guys for everything, for the time, and thank you for your question and for your attentiveness. We appreciate it, and I hope you can continue to support Atlas Network, because without your generosity, we're not going to be able to, pursue policy reforms that will make the AFTA a reality. So with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of this amazing conference.